It's all about loving yourself unconditionally, spirituality, how to trust in life.
I'm recording on my iPhone 15. You're recording on your Mac, right? And I think people can judge by themselves. It's very simple, but it works well.
Would you say it's good to invite people in to have more reach in order to reach more people?
Hi, and welcome to this new episode of my podcast debut. Today I'm with Kat, and my intention here is for people maybe like you, Kat, who are considering starting a podcast but aren't sure, have some questions. Where we're going to talk about it, and hopefully through our conversation with Kat, you as a viewer can also feel into, is it right for you to start a podcast now and get some of your questions answered? So Kat, thank you so much for coming to the show today. And I'd love to start with asking you, what's your purpose? What really matters to you in life?
My purpose is very clear to me, which is to embody unconditional love, first of all, embody it myself, and teach it, share it with the world, remind people of their own magic, of their own power, of how beautiful life is and how effortless and magical it can actually be. That's my purpose.
Beautiful. I love that. And is there a specific way you express it, like maybe through coaching or through conscious entrepreneurship, or what? How do you share that with the world mainly?
Yes, so I do energy work. That's one part of what I'm doing. So um, yeah, I call it the cosmic bath when it's one to one, and I call it the cosmic room when it's with a lot of people in the room. So yeah, because I feel like it's a cosmic bath, you know. I'm just holding space. I'm not manipulating anything. I'm just opening a space where people just heal themselves if that's what they're required to do, or they just connect with something so much bigger than themselves. And also, I do a thing that I call heart talks. I don't really like to call myself a coach or a mentor or put like a label on it. So I prefer to just say, let's just have a heart talk. And yeah, so I help people in this way. And I also like to create content on Instagram, especially to kind of to inspire people and yeah, to help them with some issues or to make them laugh also. That's a big thing in my life is like a little bit of comedy to all of this serious stuff, you know.
Hmm. That's beautiful. And we connected actually in Thor's community on school. I've had Thor in my other podcast, The Light Leaders, and really appreciate his content. I haven't done the challenge that you're doing, which is more Instagram based,
Yeah.
but actually I feel like could be a great conversation we have as you're doing that. And that's a question I've had myself and that maybe many other conscious creators have, which is long form versus short form. And obviously, it's not that you have to choose one or the other, but I believe, especially when you're starting, it's good to yeah, to choose one to prioritize at least. So, for example, in my case, I still publish on Instagram, but I put more energy into my YouTube channels and my long form content. And I think that can be a really good conversation. I'd love to ask you, Kat, do you have a preference yourself between sharing things on Instagram or in more long form content like YouTube videos or podcasts?
Yeah, so I think both is really important in some way because the short form is more to like get people to get energy moving, you know, to get people in a fast way, you know, and show a lot of different things. Also, all of your different parts that you usually most of all have like a lot of parts, and you can in short form you can show all those parts really fast. But then you cannot really go deep, so that's why I'm thinking of starting a podcast because I would like to go deeper and have a real conversation and like really go deep in every single topic, you know, that I'm interested in like bringing forward. And for that, I believe the long content is really amazing. Myself, I'm more comfortable when I'm not like on camera, like being recorded. So rather than YouTube, I would rather first go to podcasts and like start being comfortable with just like talking. Because I'm very self-conscious sometimes when I'm on camera and then I see myself and then there's something that kind of interferes, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, oh, it's me talking, you know? But when I don't have a
Mm.
camera, it feels more like it's coming through me and it's more authentic and it just flows, you know? Yeah.
I love that. And it's very common for many people. It's much easier to start having conversations like we're having right now versus speaking alone in a room in front of the lens of a camera, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
And thank
absolutely.
you for sharing also on the YouTube and Instagram. Yes, one thing I like also with the podcast now is it became much easier thanks to softwares like Riverside, like we're using right now. I put a link in my description also. And it also creates shorts for Instagram. So what I often do is when I have a guest, we'll create clips directly with AI from Riverside, and then I can add them as a collaborator, so I can still leverage my clips for Instagram and still use both. Well, obviously, doing the other way around would be harder to repurpose, right? And by the way, I'm recording on my iPhone 15. You're recording on your Mac, right? And I think people can judge by themselves. It's very simple, but it works well. So in our day and age, it's much easier to produce a podcast that looks good without super fancy technology and without spending too much time. So that's also something that made me go more in that direction after 7 years of podcasting myself. And a few years ago it was much more like a full-time job, and now people can do it on the side, a bit like they have an Instagram account. But that being said, I really like the creativity of sharing something in 90 seconds with people also, so I also play that Instagram game.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I really love this app. I have never heard of it and I think that's quite helpful if you want to start a new podcast, right?
Yeah, it is, because especially for people like me and many conscious creators that don't love editing and spending a lot of time with that. After we're recording, 45 minutes later, the episode will be on YouTube and I'll have clips to share. So it's very light post production. I'd love to go to your podcast idea then and ask you, so if you were to start your podcast, what would you want to create?
Um, I would like to talk by myself. So I'm not into, for now, I'm not into inviting people in. I would just see what comes through in the moment, you know. So I like to give myself as like a channel, you know, and then so that the things can just come through me without a lot of preparation. I'm not a planning kind of person, organizing kind of person. So yeah, I would say I would just talk about what comes up in the moment, you know.
We're on specific topics.
Well, it's all about loving yourself unconditionally, spirituality, how to trust in life, you know. It's all things that I have been going through basically. It's my own life experience because I don't like to talk about things that I have not experienced myself, you know. So obviously you can learn things and broadcast them, but I feel like first you have to embody them really and really talk from a place of the body, you know. And I think that for me is like the most important thing, that I talk about things that I embody myself, which is my life experience in the end. You know, I've had a spiritual awakening at some point, you know. I know what it feels like, you know, when nothing makes sense, when your whole world is like falling apart and you think you're going crazy, you know, you don't understand the world anymore. So I can help with these topics, you know, with people, yeah, with their lives being very chaotic and all these things, you know. And I think that is happening for a lot of people right now because we are in this awakening moment in time, I think, you know. And a lot of people are having a hard time. So I would like to guide and help people with whatever I have already experienced, what I have already embodied. And I'm still learning. It's not that I'm done. So, just take people along the way that maybe are just a couple of steps behind me. That's, yeah, that's what I would love to do.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love that. And actually, that's what drew me to start my podcast 7 years ago, which is that I received from podcasts a lot of the education I wish I received, but I didn't. And so I felt like I want to pass it on. And that's what I understand you want to do too, which I think is powerful. And just speaking to you right now, you're also very comfortable, I feel, on camera already and doing this podcast. I can feel that that you're ready, and thank you again for coming here. I'd love to also address the viewer right now. If, like Kat, you're considering starting your own podcast and you'd love to have a conversation, let's just do it. Come, I'd love to have you as a guest, and let's have a conversation. And you can see that it's probably easier than people think, especially having a conversation, going through like maybe the iPhone or the Mac that you have is good enough, and then you already have a lot of wisdom, I'm sure, that you want to share with the world. So if that's you, check in the description and send me a DM, and we can organize an interview. And thank you so much, Kat, for having the courage also to be here, to show up, and to um yeah, like you again, you're very comfortable with it. I love that. And I'd love to ask you, why haven't you started already?
Good question. Yeah, I'm sometimes a bit of a procrastinator, I think. I also have a little bit of ADHD. I don't like to like label it either, but I do have like a lot of things in my brain, and I start things and I never finish them. I have a lot of ideas, and so it's very difficult for me to like organize myself, and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this now. So yeah, I'm going like step by step, I'm now focused on the social media, I'm going to do the 30-day challenge, and maybe after I can like focus on the podcast more, and kind of get that going. So I think it's a matter of like organizing myself basically. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And procrastination, it's a real thing.
I love it.
Very, very classic. A lot of people suffer from the procrastination. Actually, that's also one thing that drew me to become a podcast coach. Is I could feel a lot of people. Well, two things. A lot of people have a podcast and never start. That's the procrastination. But another part is you mentioned like starting things. 90% of podcasts, they don't reach episode 10 because they don't have the right systems in place, and they get excited, but then it becomes overwhelming or they don't get the results. So yeah, to me, an important part of my work is to get people to get started for sure. And that's why I like even doing these things, is it can give people the momentum already. And then of course with the accountability and the right training is, and the right tools and processes, much easier to start. But also having those right processes help to keep going. So for example, posting every week with 4 hours a week or less, and something that's high quality, is important for someone who's not a full-time podcaster. So yeah, thank you for sharing about that procrastination. And at the same time, I really honor, like, it's good to have focus. So now you're doing that challenge on social media, you're focusing on that, and that's good. And so maybe in the months after that, that would be really beautiful. I'd love to ask you, do you have any main challenges apart from the fact that it's not a priority right now, but if you feel like, okay, I'm going to prioritize it, what do you feel is going to be a challenge ahead?
I think all the tech stuff, I'm not very into like all this technology, and so I'm not sure. I don't even know what platforms exist for podcasts. I mean, I know there's Spotify. I know there is, the Apple has one, podcast thing, but I don't know the platforms where I should be posting it, and then also I don't know how to post it because I've never done it before, and I haven't put myself in these spaces to like actually find out. So I think basically that's it. Like the very first steps. So maybe I have recorded something and then what? you know?
Hmm. Yeah, where to post, how to post. I've recorded something, and now what? So Actually, where to post, I usually recommend prioritizing YouTube, to be honest, even for podcasts, because it's so great for discovery. Like people are going to search things on YouTube and find you. And then I also recommend being on Spotify and potentially iTunes, because the people who find you, who already know you through YouTube or Instagram, might want to subscribe. That's more like true fans, and then you have easier access to them. So that's a strategy I recommend for most people. How to do it, honestly, that's part of my course. I train people, but it's fairly straightforward. You could look at tutorials, but Spotify for creators is free. YouTube is free, and I wouldn't get too caught up with there's like those platforms like Buzzsprout and other things, but I've never used them, and yeah, that's not usually what I recommend. And then the other point, which is interesting, we said, okay, I record, and then how do I post? Especially as you shared, you're quite intuitive. That's something that can be interesting, that you feel what comes through, and you're like, okay, how do I post? On YouTube, it can be quite important how to package it, thumbnail, title, because on YouTube you have the potential to go much beyond people who know you and use the algorithm to get new people to discover you, but the packaging is important. um, I'm not sure if it would work for you because you're working more intuitively, but maybe fill into also something that can be a great best practice for YouTube is, instead of starting with the content, almost starting with the packaging, starting with what what do people need, what can I help them with, and then have the video flow from that intention. So I often create content like that too. How would that feel to you?
Yeah, that's a good thing too. I mean, I like to start with like two sentences that I'd already, to have a direction where this is going to go, and then from
Mm,
there it usually flows by itself. But I think it's good because you're not in the flow from the very first moment usually, In the first moment you're still a little bit like you're shaky with what you want to say, right? So I do like to plan a little bit just to for something to start off with, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like the bank of the river that allow the river to flow.
Yes, exactly. So that can flow by itself. Yeah.
I love that, and I'd love to ask you, as that's what I'm doing, helping people with their podcast. Do you have any questions for me?
Let's see. Um, so Spotify and YouTube are for free, right? You don't pay to have a podcast or to have a YouTube, or do they have fees and
It's free.
it's for free? Hmm. And would you say it's good to invite people in to have more reach in order to reach more people? I guess that would be the case, right? If you had people invited.
Yeah, yeah. I actually really like the mix of both, because I do what I recommend. Yeah, I mean, look, you can do what you want. There are some really good podcasts where it's only one person speaking and they don't have guests, but usually that may work better for people who already have a big audience. So let's say you have 1 million followers on Instagram, you start your podcast. People often want to hear from you, and they don't necessarily want to have guests. I know, maybe you know Jenny Dinovi. She's quite big on Instagram and with her podcast, and she actually says people don't really like when she has guests. So it's totally a possibility. At the same time, personally, I like the mix of both. That's what I do with my podcast, because I find the interviews really allow, as you said, to expand the reach, especially. A rule of thumb is when you interview people, you can go 10x. So let's take Instagram, close to 6,000 followers. I have many guests that are around 100,000 followers, right? Because people like to be interviewed. If I go to people with 2 million, it's a bit out of my league, let's call it this way, but I can go 10x. And then they'll share the clips, and so that helps me get a lot of audience. At the same time, it's I appreciate that people know what I stand for, what I'm about. So sometimes if I feel like doing a solo episode, I want to do that. And also there is a mix between an interview and a conversation. So for example, right now it's more like a conversation also. And you can put that into your podcast. So you could have guests where you do an interview, but you can have guests where you have a conversation also. Is that something you'd feel drawn to?
Yeah, maybe not from the beginning, maybe once I'm comfortable doing it by myself, then maybe with time I would consider that, I guess. Yes. Yeah, sounds interesting and makes a lot of sense, to reach more people, obviously, and which would also be like a collaboration in a way, right? So you're like collaborating, co-creating with someone, which is something that I like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like obviously it doesn't have to be so like it has to be like this, but the almost tacit agreement is, let's say in my case, I wouldn't phrase it this way. It's like, hey, I have 6,000 followers, you have 60,000. I'm gonna have you on my podcast, and I'm going to promote you through that. And in exchange for me putting you in that light, I'm also gonna put in the light of your 60,000. And that's kind of the it's a big win-win for both camps if everyone plays the game. So I don't phrase it this way, but often it's a little bit the agreement behind it. I'd love to ask you, um didn't you say at the beginning that you felt it was easier to have conversations, and now you're telling me that you'll have those conversations once you're comfortable doing the solo episodes?
What was the first part of the question? I didn't get that.
Well, I felt at the beginning of our conversation, you said you felt it was easier to have conversations rather than speaking alone in front of a camera. But now for the podcast, you feel like doing that the other way around.
Um, yeah, right? Um, I don't know. I guess it's because I don't like to plan things, and I feel like when there's another person, then it would have to be a lot more planned. And I'm so much like, I'm a person that does everything out of the moment and intuitively. And so yeah, if I have a conversation with somebody else, I would have to organize and structure, yeah, which I'm a little resented too.
I
Yeah.
understand. I mean, it's actually true. It's easier once you have the conversation, but the organization around it requires more effort than just recording yourself. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's the trade-off too. They both have their pros and cons. And well, one idea also, if you'd be open to that, is to have conversation with potentially people you're helping, and that could showcase your work in a dynamic way too.
Yeah, that's interesting.
How
I
do you
never
feel about that?
thought about that. That's a good idea, actually. Yeah, because then people would also relate to the person that has issues or whatever, and yeah, that would be a nice way too. Absolutely. And I just
Yeah, thank.
came up with one question. How does algorithm works with like Spotify, for example? Is there an algorithm? Like, can people find you there in what ways? Or what
Yeah.
would trigger the algorithm to show it to more people or not?
So Spotify is trying to be a little bit more like YouTube in the way that it recommends content. But to be honest, most people's behavior is that on Spotify, they go there to check the podcast they already subscribed to. People don't really go on Spotify and search, how do I cleanse my aura? For example, they go on YouTube and search, how do I cleanse my aura? And at least that's what I do. I go on YouTube to search for things,
Yeah.
and on Spotify, I have a few dedicated podcasts that I like. And when I catch a plane, I'm like, okay, what am I going to listen to? So to me, the algorithm in Spotify doesn't play such a big role. However, on YouTube, it's massive. It's what makes that on YouTube, if you do a podcast or video, if it's not so good, it's not even going to reach your subscribers. And if it's really good, it's going to reach way beyond your subscribers, and the algorithm is going to push your video to a lot more people. So that's my experience on YouTube. I have some videos that go in the tens of thousands, and those same episodes are still at a few hundred, which is my usual um, viewership on Spotify with my podcast, The Light Leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So Spotify is much more stable and stay in those hundreds. YouTube can go in the thousand or tens of thousands if the algorithm is like, whoa, that video is great. I'm going to recommend it to a lot more people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I'll have to think about doing YouTube as well.
Yeah, well, if you do video already, there's no extra work. And Spotify also prefers video now, and they
Mhm.
favor video content. So, you already have all the equipment you need. There's no extra work.
You think the sound is good enough?
Yeah, you can judge by yourself when you listen to the episode afterwards. Of course, you could buy a mic, but right now I'm with my iPhone 15, not even with a mic, and then you can just buy an external USB-C mic like this one, or there's many you can look up. The simpler, also the better,
Mm-hmm.
as long as it sounds good. But I do think it sounds good. You'll judge by yourself. The people who watch this episode can judge by themselves also.
Mm-hmm. Great. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kat. So, is there anything else? And was that valuable?
Oh, that was super helpful. Yes. Thanks a lot. Thank you for all the insights. And I do feel like it was kind of an accelerator to kind of actually start doing it and really considering it for real. So yeah, thank you. Thanks. Very grateful.
Amazing. I love that. What are your main takeaways from our conversation today?
Oh wow, like how easy it actually feels, you know? Like it's not so hard to actually start something going, you know? And there's so many possibilities of actually doing things, you know. You can do it by yourself, you can do it with somebody else, and the different outcomes the things have, you know. So yeah, it's very valuable.
Amazing. As you do it, you'll get better. You also get a better feel for what you like and what you don't like as much. And so
Yeah,
that's something you can keep evolving with. Yeah.
yeah. It's starting like everything else. I guess it's just starting the thing and learning along the way.
Yes, I love that. Beating the procrastination. Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you to everyone if you're still watching now, thank you so much. If you want to support, of course, like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. What did you learn today? Do you have any questions? I read all the comments and I answer to all of them. And of course, if you have a podcast in you, or even if you're not sure, come on the podcast and discuss it like Kat just did. If you feel a little shy, you can still DM me and we can have a private conversation. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Kat, for joining today. Is there anything that you want to share as closing words?
I'm just super grateful that we have these technologies, you know, to broadcast ourselves, and I'm just really grateful for that. Yeah, that we have the world at our feet in the end, right?
Yes, it is pretty cool, and that's why we can make the best use of it. And we didn't get into AI so much, but with Riverside, there's a lot of cool stuff with AI, and I also use ChatGPT, and it makes the whole flow much easier. So very grateful for all these technologies for sure, and they keep releasing new things. So it's just getting better and better. Much love, Kat. Much love to everyone.